Welcome to the AAC Report only on the Knightline Sports Network. Monday, June 24th. I'm Jeff Allen. Thanks for listening. Joining us now is Dan Brechlin, sports editor of the Hartford Courant, to discuss the University of Connecticut's move to the Big East in 2020. Lots of burning questions, what it means for the Huskies, the AAC, and the Big East. Dan will join us now to discuss all of that. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Glad to be on.
So the Big East presidents voted to approve UConn's return today. If you had to pick what the main impetus behind the Huskies' move is, what would it be?
Oh, it's absolutely having to do with basketball here. UConn football has kind of fallen off the map in the last few years. They've really struggled on a number of fronts, whether it's actual wins and losses, or if it has to do with getting fans in the doors. I think what UConn wants to do here is to protect themselves as best they can in terms of basketball. They want to be playing at a high level. That's not a knock on the AAC or anything. I think this has to do with fans just never bought into some of the AAC opponents. I think I think Connecticut has a history of playing games against teams like Georgetown, St. John's, Seton Hall, Providence, Villanova, those teams, and I think they kind of yearn for some of that nostalgia and high-level basketball. And, I think UCF, Houston, some other teams have built some pretty good programs. It's just, for whatever reason, UConn fans never connected very well with those programs.
How much impact did the new ESPN deal play a part? It's a deal that has some things that look good on paper, but also a bit nebulous as far as when revenue payments increase, how they expect the value of the contract to hold up in a 12-year deal with an ever-changing media landscape. And more games being on their ESPN Plus. So how much of a factor was that?
I think it was definitely a factor. I don't think it was like driving factor necessarily. I think it might have been a last straw kind of situation. UConn never spoke up publicly saying that, hey, we don't like this deal in terms of financials. Now, was it maybe a little bit lower than what they were hoping to get in terms of annual revenue? Probably a little bit. I bet they wish they were getting closer to, say, $10 million annually versus I think they're around $7 million. But it really had to come down to exposure. UConn has an interesting situation where, people love the men's basketball team, absolutely. But there is a true force in this state for UConn women's basketball. And I think they took a lot of risks in terms of moving it off of, traditional TV and onto a streaming platform where a lot of the fans that follow UConn women's basketball might not be as familiar with that. But they're certainly looking for added exposure, so they wish they were on TV on a more routine basis. We have there's a TV station up here, SNY, the sports network, that UConn has had a kind of a side deal with the last few years, that it is able to air a handful of men's basketball games, a ton of women's basketball games, and a handful of football games. And the potential of that going away was definitely a factor because UConn was able to make some extra revenue there, and it was definitely it was on traditional TV. So that going away was definitely a huge factor.
So the bylaws are that it's supposed to be a 27-month notification. There's a $10 million exit fee, and UConn's looking to join the Big East after 2019-2020 seasons wrap up. So how will all this get worked out? Would the Big East do something to help out UConn financially, maybe give the Americans some out-of-conference basketball scheduling, perhaps? How do you think that all works out?
I'm curious to see how it works out. I think there's a lot of negotiations that are going on. I would expect sometime in the next week or so, UConn will send some type of letter or something to the AAC saying we plan on withdrawing. When they do that, that starts the 27-month clock formally, and then UConn apparently has to pay. We were reporting today they have to pay $2.5 million up front, so that's the first 2.5 of 10. But because they're not going to make that full 27 months in the AAC, they're going to have to negotiate a little bit. So UConn's definitely going to have to pay some extra money. We expect it to be a little bit closer to maybe $12 million. I don't expect the Big East to throw any additional money in because unless they do something like they waive the entry fee, because there was I think it was about $2.5 million entry fee, or maybe it's $2 million entry fee into the Big East. So UConn's paying on two fronts here. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. We were looking at some other teams and how they've moved around in conferences and such. Even when Louisville left the conference, they gave 27 months heads up and let it go that full time, and they wound up paying about 11. Going back to the old Big East days, I think it was West Virginia got into quite a dispute. They had to pay far more than that. It was closer to $20 million, but they were going to the Big 12, and the Big 12 had just gotten some exit fees, so they wound up, I think, dishing out $9 million. So, like I said, I don't expect the Big East necessarily to be pitching in money right away. I won't rule anything out, but I think there's going to be some negotiations here in terms of, that $10 million exit fee. It should be a little bit higher.
And you mentioned earlier the football program has fallen off in recent years. What message does it send there? Randy Edsall brought back to restore the program to where it was before he departed from Maryland. And obviously the American not likely to let them stay for football only. What is the future of the football program at Connecticut?
That's a great question. I think my gut instinct is that UConn goes independent, at least for a couple of years, and tries to find its way. I think what was clear was that football wasn't working out very well in the AAC in terms of drawing fans anymore. Sure, that has plenty to do with the state of the team. I think when Randy Edsall took over, he thought it was going to be kind of a quick turnaround, that he could make things work. That has not been the case whatsoever. He started a ton of true freshmen on defense last year, and they had a historically bad defensive team. So I don't exactly know as far as how this is going to play out. The other option is to try to talk to AAC into staying for a little while. I don't think that's going to work because I don't think the AAC is thrilled that they're leaving, losing that basketball exposure. I don't think football is the draw for the AAC exactly. So the other option is to start looking for another conference, like the MAC or the Conference USA or something like that. I wouldn't necessarily rule that one out yet, but you're definitely looking at a lot less revenue in terms of TV dollars there. So I could say the fans of the football program weren't exactly thrilled by this. Sure, there's plenty of overlap with basketball fans too. So I would say, we did a Twitter poll just to find out, and I think we had 1,300 or 1,400 people weigh in, and overwhelmingly they supported this move. And I've heard plenty from fans via email, Twitter, everywhere else that, if there's one drawback, it's that football would get the death sentence at some point. I don't think it's going to happen in the next 2 to 4 years. But if the program doesn't turn it around in terms of wins and losses, it's really going to turn into why are we even doing this anymore? So we'll see there. It should be interesting to watch.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, staying in the American, that'd be kind of like, breaking up with your ex-girlfriend and still letting her live at your house, right?
Yeah, I made a similar comparison, actually, in the office the other day. Just, it's a weird breakup because, I don't know this to be true, but I get the sense that this was kind of a, oh, by the way, I don't think this thing's going to work out. We're out of here sort of deal. But I have nowhere else to go, like you said, so if you don't mind me sticking around for a couple months, that'd be great. But I think it's already going to be kind of an awkward situation just this coming year. We're talking about the AAC does a football media day up in Newport, Rhode Island, probably about 2 or 3 weeks from now. That should be really interesting to see Mike Loresco interacting, the AAC commissioner, and the other football coaches. I'm sure they'll be cordial and everything. It's just, kind of an awkward situation for everybody.
I'd like to sell tickets and get a cut of that for sure.
Absolutely.
So obviously basketball, the driving force here. First, we'll talk about the men's side. So, they're not going back to their daddy's Big East, but, the Big East is obviously a solid league. Both them and the American were 4 bid teams in the tournament. And I don't think it matters which league. Danny Hurley certainly is poised to bring the Huskies back to prominence. And I guess this is clearly a move they think will benefit them going back to their roots.
Yeah, I think so. We've been looking at attendance figures, and that goes for men's basketball, women's basketball, football, everything. But men's basketball, not this past season, but the season before, wound up having the lowest attendance in UConn men's basketball history, dating back to the old years before the arena on campus even existed. I think this goes back into the 80s when Calhoun was just kind of really getting the program boosted up. And, that just obviously sends an awful message. Now, Dan Hurley coming over certainly got the fans excited. And, I don't know if he'll have the team in the NCAA tournament next year, but certainly it's going to be in a much better state. They lose a couple players, but I think they'll be okay. They'll bring in some really good recruits, and I think the Big East is going to be an even bigger draw in terms of recruiting. These teams, it's not exactly your father's Big East, but there's no denying that UConn fans love the nostalgia. I see every single day, it feels like, on Twitter, something about the old UConn-Villanova game, this old UConn-Georgetown game, and fans grew up watching that, and even now you're adding a team like Xavier, which is very strong, and Butler has had seen plenty of success, so those are recognizable names, and they still mean something to UConn fans, just in a way that Houston, SMU, East Carolina, those schools it never clicked. It never felt like a true rivalry. It just felt like, this is another team that we're playing twice a year.
And obviously on the women's side, being in the American hasn't stopped them from getting to the Final Fours. And in fact, I think the rest of the league is probably going to celebrate them leaving because nobody's beating them in conference play. And obviously, women's basketball is such a big part of the Huskies' lore. So talk about how you think going back to the Big East will benefit them.
So this one's interesting because it's our understanding that Gino Auriemma is pleased with this move. Now, the level of competition may not be all that similar, I would say. In UConn, obviously, it is what it is in terms of women's basketball. It's a national powerhouse. Next year, they're playing, pretty much every top team that you could imagine in the country, and they'll, I'm sure, do pretty well. I think, and again, this is kind of just me speculating, but I don't think it sat well last year when UConn loses 2 games and winds up as a number 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. And the NCAA tournament committee was, openly saying that, they don't play in the strongest conference in the world. So, I don't know if they go to a dramatically stronger conference, but they are going to one that has the name value, maybe that helps out a little bit. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if Gino's at least a little bit happy here. There are some stronger teams there that they will be playing annually versus, a team like East Carolina, they just routinely destroyed. There was never any true competition there for them.
Yeah, in fact, UCF was the number 2 team in the conference, and they had a pretty good season by a lot of people's standards, but they couldn't even run with UConn. So that just tells you what the gap is between the UConn women and the rest of their competition. So the Big East, obviously, it's a regional, it's a nostalgic thing, like you said. But the old adage is you can't go back home again, or can you? Do you think this is going to be a big success for them in the long run?
Success will be an interesting word to define in this because at the end of the day, a lot of things still will always come down to money. it is a bit of a risk for UConn to leave the AAC where they had guaranteed money, and they had a deal with the regional sports network too. They also were dealing with a $41 million deficit in the athletic department last year, which plenty of athletic departments were on a deficit. It's just that $41 million was a strikingly high number. If they could chop that in half for them, that would have been great. But there was no direct route in order to do that. You'd have to cut some staff. You'd have to make some sacrifices in terms of which sports you want to run and all that. UConn will save some money in terms of travel. They will get plenty of money in terms of basketball. It'll come down to how much they're able to make off of football. I think no matter what, this is probably a success in terms of basketball, the way that it goes, because I think that you re-engage a fan base and you re-engage them at a pretty high level versus what they were in the AAC. For the athletic department, I think the success is going to be defined by how much money they're able to save by this move and then generate 5 years from now. If they're able to put together at least a somewhat competitive program that's going to a bowl most years, I think you've re-engaged that football fan base. But getting there will be interesting. Going independent is such a risk if they decide to take that, because you're talking about putting together your own schedule every year, which is first, just time consuming, I'm sure. It's a lot of phone calls, a lot of negotiating. They'll have to set up to play these bye games. They have one set up for Clemson in a few years, as if they stand a chance against Clemson. And that'll, at the same time, that gives them over $1 million right there. And there's a couple other bye games that they have set up where, you get $1 million. You're going to lose that, but you're also going to have to play these other games against teams that are UConn is always viewed as inferior. So probably every year for a little while they'll have a game against UMass, University of Massachusetts. It's not the most exciting. Potentially you get some people in the doors, though, because it's a rivalry down the road. You can do this on an annual basis, build that up a little bit. But at the end of the day, people want to see some good football being played and some competitive teams. So I don't know. I don't know exactly how to define success for UConn in this one, but as far as basketball goes, I would say it's a success for sure.
And there really are no other conference options for them for football? I mean, Conference USA or the MAC, any of those have any potential at all?
I think those two conferences that you just named, I think those are in play. They'll have to, talk their way into it, I'm sure. But the money that's out there is so much smaller than the AAC. I think that's why it was it's certainly a pipe dream to stay in the AAC. It would be taking a lot of negotiating there, but you're talking closer to $1-2 million per year, probably in the MAC and the Conference USA. Sure, it gives you a bunch of games, but scheduled already. I certainly wouldn't rule that out. If you want to play it safe, go there and see how you can do for a few years. And the non-conference schedule, I would load up with 2 or 3 bye games a year, to be honest, just to make sure that you're kind of breaking even from leaving the AAC. So I don't know. It would take the invites too. You have to talk those conferences into you being a meaningful football program that will help them in the long run. I'm not sure if those conferences, they have some okay teams. They don't have incredible standouts, but you also run into the same thing where you're playing teams that fans can't connect with. They don't plan on connecting with them, I'm sure. And that's what we just had with the AAC, where it never felt like true rivalries. So you're doing that, but you're doing it against teams that aren't even as good. I'm not sure that'll work out in the long run.
Well, I tell you what, it's an interesting move nonetheless, and it's certainly good for business, for podcasts, for the media companies, and the social media for sure.
It kept me busy all weekend, I can tell you that. We had the PGA Tour is actually in town so we were trying to cover that, and then this news happens, and it was quite the scramble this weekend, I can tell you that. But the interest was certainly there online. We saw some incredible page views, for sure.
Dan Brechlin, sports editor of the Hartford Courant, thank you so much for being here and breaking it down with us.
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
And, of course, this certainly generated a lot of conversation starting on Saturday with this news of UConn wanting to go back to the Big East. A lot of that discussion you heard on Knightline 192 with Andrew and Trace. Lots of speculation. Who should take UConn's place in the conference? Lots of interesting possibilities out there. You know, having Army be part of the American and, you know, grouping them up with Navy would be great. You know, I don't know how much value it brings you, you know, as far as football wins and losses, strength of schedule. You know, right now Army is up and Navy is down. It's been vice versa. And, you know, then you also have to look at the Army-Navy game. That's going to have to move to probably Thanksgiving weekend because you can't wait till, you know, the second week of December if one of those teams is in play for the conference championship. So, you know, in recent years, they've had that whole thing to themselves the second Saturday in December. So, you know, that'd be a tough tradition to break, but, you know, it's not to say you can't change. You know, Marshall was kind of an interesting prospect. You know, I definitely had some, you know, they definitely have some juice with UCF as far as a rivalry goes. It'd be kind of interesting to renew that again. But again, does that bring you big strength of schedule? You know, a Boise State would, but, you know, geographically, it's probably not a good fit. At the end of the day, I think it's just better to kind of sit and wait a little bit. They can run with 11 for a little while. I don't think that, you know, they're the team they're losing, they're not losing much with the Huskies leaving from football. So from that aspect, I think going with 11 for a little bit, I think taking your time and making a wise choice and making the best choice is probably the prudent move as far as that is concerned. But hey, nonetheless, gives us something to talk about in the summertime. You know, I was going on a little hiatus, and then I realized I'm going back to work on Monday for another AAC report. And we do thank you for joining us. I'm Jeff Allen. Have a great week.